G'day guys, welcome back to the Boundary Riders YouTube channel, and today we are going to be taking a look at some more trade rumours that have dropped over the past month or so. You may have seen last month we did our first edition of 2025 trade rumours, and we're going to be doing this about once a month until we get into the real stuff towards the end of the season. But guys, we have a lot to talk about today. It's been really surprising that we've actually been seeing a lot of trade rumours already dropping in January and February of 2025, and we've got so long to go. First of all, I did want to cover the top 10 biggest names that are coming out of contract at the end of 2025. So at number 1, we have Chad Warner. Number 2, Andrew Brayshaw. Number 3, Luke Davies-Uniacke. Number 4, Oscar Allen. Number 5, Matt Rowell. Number 6, Tom De Koning. Number 7, Finn Callahan. Number 8, Sam De Koning. Number 9, Nasiah Wanganeen-Millera. And number 10 is Ed Richards. So a lot of big names to go through here. There is also Marcus Bontempelli that is not on this list, but we will start with Marcus Bontempelli before we get into some real trade rumours. So recently, David King was on SEN talking about Marcus Bontempelli being out of contract. He still hasn't signed with the Bulldogs and talked about the severity of him leaving the club. Now, I tend to agree. If he left the club, it would probably be the biggest player movement we have seen, probably since Buddy Franklin. And I don't think there's been many more bigger than that. Maybe Tony Lockett moving from St Kilda to Sydney way back in the day, but I really don't think there's been any bigger move than this. So I think that I honestly think that Marcus Bontempelli will re-sign. I think that he's so important to the club. He basically is the Western Bulldogs at this point. It would be unfathomable that he would leave the club. But there is still a little sneaky chance that he could leave. So first of all, let's move into some trade rumours now. First of all, we have Oscar Allen. Of course, a captain of the West Coast Eagles, been there for his whole career. But the reigning premier in the Brisbane Lions are looking for a new key forward after the retirement of Joe Danaher. And Brisbane are in talks to try and hunt down Oscar Allen as a free agent. He is hopefully going to be the replacement for them. Oscar Allen still hasn't re-signed. He could potentially be one of the highest paid players in the AFL. When he's fit, Oscar Allen is one of the best key forwards in the game. Just really hasn't had a clean run at it. At the end of the day, I think if Oscar Allen did move to the Brisbane Lions, it would be a massive get for Brisbane. They would be right back in the premiership hunt in 2026 as well. I don't think they're really out of it this year, but I think that would be a great move for Brisbane. However, at this stage, I really think Oscar Allen will re-sign to the West Coast Eagles. They're one of the richest clubs in the AFL. He's the captain there. He's a young leader. I think West Coast will throw a lot of money at him and he will stay at the Eagles. Next one is the big one. We talked about this last time, which is Chad Warner. Recently, we found information that Chad Warner purchased a multi-million-dollar home, 4-bedroom property in Applecross, which according to Google Maps is exactly 17 minutes away from Fremantle HQ and West Coast HQ, and is now up for rent. You can look at this a few different ways. You could say he's buying a holiday home, which is what Errol Goulden said, or you could look at it as he's already looking to try and move to WA. My thought is that this isn't a big story on the point that AFL players buy homes all the time. From my understanding, Zach Butters owns a property in Victoria. Obviously, he's not going from Port Adelaide anytime soon. Although, we could maybe make the idea that he is going to leave Port Adelaide. I don't think that's a big a deal. I don't think that really plays into Chad Warner leaving. However, I understand why it would be gathering traction. Because I do think that at the end of the year, Chad Warner will leave. I'm on the camp now that Chad Warner's going to leave the Sydney Swans. The only thing that may save him from leaving Sydney this year is the fact that I believe in a couple of years he goes to free agency, so he may sign a short-term contract with the Sydney Swans. I think that's maybe the issue right now, that Chad Warner maybe wants to sign a small contract and then see how he goes into free agency, while Sydney are pretty prone to try and giving these young players like really long contracts, like Logan McDonald, Errol Goulden. They've been given huge contracts for a lot of years. I think that's what the point that they're at right now is, that Chad Warner wants to sign a short-term contract, and the Swans want to try and sign him to a longer deal. Early stages, I'm thinking he's probably gone, which would be really disappointing as a Swans fan, but we'll just have to wait and see how that one plays out. Next up, we have Luke Davies-Uniacke. Now, North Melbourne Star, according to Channel 10, has given the strongest indication yet that he is keen to remain at North Melbourne. Jai Simpkin has been quoted saying in an interview that we love him and he loves us. I think we're very confident that he'll re-sign on the dotted line rather than later. So they're thinking that he's going to sign pretty shortly. And North Melbourne have recently tabled a contract extension to Luke Davies-Uniacke that would be 7 years. Luke Davies-Uniacke is one of the most popular players probably going into this trade period. There's obviously talk last year as well that he could potentially move to St Kilda, which has gravitated gravitated towards this year. My feeling now is that Luke Davis-Uniacke will probably re-sign with North Melbourne. I'm kind of 50-50 in the last video, but there's been a lot of information regarding him signing with North Melbourne, and I think a little bit of this will play out. I think this won't be signed very quickly. I think this will be signed maybe mid-year. I think this also relies on how North Melbourne go in the start of the season. If they have a really poor start, I think there may be some question marks on if LDU does re-sign, but if they have a pretty decent start to the year, then I think that signature will be signed very shortly. After that, we get to Tom De Koning. Now, he's recently said in an interview that he loves being at Carlton ahead of his free agency call in 2025. De Koning is out of contract at the end of the 2025 and rival clubs are set to once again knock on his door. He has recently rejected strong interest in previous years from St Kilda, Sydney and Geelong. At the moment, I think this has a little bit more to play out. Obviously, he has a very strong connection with his brother in Sam De Koning, which he is also out of contract. So that will be interesting how that plays out. Sydney did go for him a couple of years ago, but he rejected the offer, and then eventually Sydney picked up Brodie Grundy. My feeling is that Tom De Koning will re-sign with Carlton. That's my thoughts at the moment. Now, one of the big trade rumours that has been circulating over the last week or so is Matt Rowell. Now, we talked about him last time, potentially looking at an opportunity to go to Collingwood. Apparently, Geelong are heavily interested in Matt Rowell and are targeting him as a trade coup. Now, Matt Rowell has actually met with the coach in Chris Scott and Andrew Mackie in a private apartment in Melbourne's Bayside. At this stage, Matt Rowell has no intentions of leaving the Gold Coast, according to Sports News. It is reported as well that Chris Scott said to Matt Rowell, "Come here and be our next Joel Selwood." What a massive point to make here. So basically saying that he would be the next captain of the Cats. Now, the Pies are still a little bit interested. According to The Age, they are reporting that October of last year, Collingwood and Essendon met with Matt Rowell. Matt Rowell at this stage, I don't think he'll leave the Gold Coast. I think that that's a little bit too early. However, I think he'll get a short-term contract, and then when he comes to free agency, there'll be a big call. That's my opinion at the moment. Although in saying that, I do think a little bit has to play out here, depending on if the Gold Coast make finals, or at least show a lot more improvement, because he's been there for a while now. He seems like a guy who wants success, and if the Gold Coast don't make finals again this year, or at least don't get close, potentially questions will start to be asked if he wants to find more success at a Victorian club. After that, a bit of a surprising one here is Bobby Hill. SEN's Peter Vlahos has also said that he's heard two different sources say that Hill would entertain offers from both the West Coast Eagles and Fremantle and consider coming home to play in WA. He is only getting paid around $400K by Collingwood and is shopping himself around. Now, Bobby Hill obviously would be a huge loss for Collingwood if he did decide to go back to WA, but I don't think this is going to really play out. But at this stage, I really don't think Bobby Hill is going to leave Collingwood. I think that would be a very shocking revelation, to be honest, because Collingwood's a very prestigious club. Collingwood don't tend to lose a lot of players. I think that a lot of this will be on his salary. The fact that he's only $400K is one of the better small forwards in the comp. I feel like this is shopping himself around to then get a higher contract. That's my belief at this stage. I don't see Bobby Hill leaving. On Sam Draper to SA. He's an SA boy. Sam Draper's been heavily linked to the Crows, a little bit of Port Adelaide as well. I think that this one's on. I think that Sam Draper will leave Essendon at the end of the year. It does look like Nick Bryan is starting to take over that role from him, with Todd Goldstein playing as the experienced guy. Sam Draper really hasn't locked down that ruck spot for Essendon for a while now. I think he's had the time. Riley O'Brien's getting a bit older, so I think that there's a spot there for Sam Draper to move to the Crows. Port Adelaide, not so much. I think Jordan Sweet's probably got that role locked down now. They've got Vizentini as well. I really don't see Essendon making a priority of getting Sam Draper to re-sign. That's just me, though. We'll have to wait and see. Now, on Keziah Pickett, there's been a lot of information over the last month or so saying that insiders are pretty sure now that Keziah Pickett's already going to be leaving Melbourne to go to Fremantle at the end of the year. This has been so widespread that if there was a trade period tomorrow, Pickett would be on the way to Fremantle. Now, there was obviously rumours towards the trade period that Petrarca, Oliver, and Pickett were going to leave the Demons. All of them decided to stay, but Pickett at this stage is probably the big one that would leave. I think this relies on the year of Melbourne, because we've seen they've had a terrible last 24 months, really, in the game. I think they've probably had the hardest run in the media. The Melbourne Football Club have gone through it, and the Melbourne players would feel that. I think that's pretty obvious to say. So Pickett, for me, I would probably say right now that he would be on the way to Fremantle at the end of the year. But I do think a lot has to play out here on how Fremantle's form goes throughout the season. So a bit of a wait and see. At this stage, though, I would say Pickett's on the way to WA. Now, just a couple of small ones here. Players that are close to coming out of contract or are out of contract. That just a small story. It's not really massive ones just yet. First of all, Harley Reid. There is going to be a fever pitch focus on Harley Reid's contract at the end of 2025. He has a year to run on his current deal, so to get into 2026, but he hasn't added any more years beyond that, which is a bit surprising because we've seen a lot of draftees like Harry Sheezel, George Wardlaw, I believe. They get picked up by clubs in the draft, and then pretty soon into their season, if they show a lot of good signs, the clubs try to re-sign them to a longer contract. Harley Reid is yet to do that. I don't think that's a massive deal. I think, like I said with Oscar Allen, that Harley Reid is at one of the richest clubs in the country. I don't think this is much of a watch at this stage, but maybe at the end of, in start of 2026, if there's no more years added to his contract in a year of his contract year, maybe there'll be talk more about Harley Reid leaving. I don't think this is really a big story just yet, but of course, when Harley Reid's in the headlines, player movement's always going to be around. I think he will stay at West Coast for the time being. Finn Callaghan, plenty of Victorian clubs keeping an eye on Finn. Likely the same ones who are keeping the eye on Luke Davis-Uniacke. He's kind of fallen under the radar because Davis-Uniacke is in Victoria and Callaghan obviously plays for GWS. But I think that Callaghan should be a lot more of a watch for some of these Victorian clubs like St Kilda, because I think Callaghan is a very good player. But he's been behind a couple at the Giants. You think of Josh Kelly, Cullen Ward, who's been there forever now. I think that Callaghan's a bit of a watch here. I'm putting it on 50-50 at this stage. I don't think he's gone, but I do think it's a watch here. Callaghan is a very important player for the Giants, so maybe just keep your eye on him as the year goes on. Victorian clubs, a lot of them are looking at him. You probably think of maybe the Bulldogs as well. They've lost a couple of midfielders over the last year or so. So keep an eye on Finn Callaghan. And finally, I wanted to take a look at a couple of Port Adelaide players coming out of contract at the season's end. You got Miles Bergman, first of all. There was a lot of links to him maybe leaving the club at the end of 2024. He decided to stay on as he's still contracted, but at the end of 2025, his contract will be up. He's been a very important player for Port Adelaide for the last few years. He's been playing as a little bit of a swingman in the midfield, been a very important wingman for Port Adelaide, but has then gone into back half towards the end of last year as well. Played it on Jeremy Cameron a few times as well last year and played pretty well. So a lot of clubs will be looking at him. A lot of Victorian clubs have been linked to him in the past. Port Adelaide will probably be doing everything they can to try and sign him because he's a very important player to the Power. I don't think that Miles Bergman's a big talking point just yet, but the fact that he was in the headlines towards the end of last year and really nothing came of it, I think a lot of clubs are really stocking up to try and get Miles Bergman in 2025. And finally, Kane Farrell. He also comes out of contract. At the moment, they're trying to get things started, Port Adelaide, to try and get a contract in front of Farrell. He's such an important player for them now, considering Dan Houston has left. I think he'll sign pretty early on. He'd be one of the players that I'm looking at right now that we've talked about in this video that I think will be signed pretty early on in the year. I think Port Adelaide can get him on the contract for pretty cheap, but I do think he's a very important player to them, a lethal left footer. And I think as the years go on, with a couple of the younger guys like Josh Sinan that looking to try and take over that halfback role, that Farrell's going to be very important for their development. So I think Farrell will be signing pretty shortly. But finally, guys, before we end the video, I just wanted to quickly say as well, for all these contracts and all these trade news and stuff, this year will be the first year that AFL teams can now trade their future first round picks 2 years in advance. So a club in the trade period for 2025 could trade a future first round pick for 2026, but also could use one for 2027. So just keep your eye out on that. It does open up a lot more avenues for clubs to try and sign players from other clubs, which is a very interesting talking point going into this year's trade period. It'll be the first time that clubs can do it, and it gives them a lot more avenues to try and grab players, especially high-profile ones like Chad Warner. But guys, that's basically all I've got for you for this trade video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy it, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We're going to be trying to release 2 videos per week on this channel, and as we have talked about on the podcast, we've been keeping up with a lot of the pre-season news over there on the podcast. So if you want to be learning more about how your club's going this pre-season with injuries and form and match sims, then make sure to go check that out. That's pretty much all from me. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. But for now, we'll catch you all on the next one.